Hi, Gary Port for NY Divorce Facts here with Yuzu, Matcha, Kosho, and over on the other cage, watching us, is Azuki. I think she'll join us shortly. I'm wearing one of my bird t-shirts. Bird owners know what I'm talking about. We have those old t-shirts that we wear only when we're around birds. And that's because birds like to chew on shirts, their claws rip holes in it, and let's be frank, they also go to the bathroom on us a lot. I've mentioned before I've got 4 children who are adults and not living at home, and I've got 4 birds. And I'll tell you something about birds. They steal your food, they yell in your ear, and they crap on you. It's like my kids never left home. Well, today we're going to talk about prenuptial agreements. I typically get calls about prenuptial agreements the week of the marriage. Not a good thing, because we have to rush those through. Now, with regard to prenuptial agreements, the courts do like them, because if there's a divorce, a prenuptial agreement can solve many of the problems, and we don't have to litigate them. But you've got to be careful with prenuptial agreements. Here you go, Azuki. You've got to be careful with prenuptial agreements, because if you don't do it right, the court will knock out some of it or even all of it. And some of the things you have to worry about, you can't really take care of with those form internet prenuptials. In fact, people who want to save a few $1,000s on a form prenuptial on the internet will end up spending 10 times that amount of money when they go to trial on their divorce, because there is a procedure to set aside a prenuptial agreement. And badly drafted prenuptial agreements are subject to being set aside. And I'll be honest, so are well-drafted prenuptial agreements. But the difference is a well-drafted prenuptial agreement won't be set aside, but a poorly drafted one will be set aside. Some of the things that the courts look at is something called overreaching, duress, and being manifestly unfair. An example of duress is whether or not the party who is fighting the prenup had an attorney. How long before the wedding was the prenup? Was it seconds before you're supposed to go walk down the aisle, someone hands you the prenup and says, you got to sign this now or the wedding's off? Some courts have found that to be duress. Is the prenup in your native language, or is it in a language you don't understand? If you're Chinese and you don't read English, a prenup in English might not be enforceable. So those are some of the issues that we look at for duress. Unfairness. Well, if there's a prenup that says all the marital property goes to one party and not evenly split, that may be unfair. The other thing we like to do with prenups is to make sure that separate property remains separate. Sometimes, if people don't watch what they're doing, they can turn separate property into marital property. That's called commingling. And that's something that's a concern in prenuptial agreements. Another thing we do in prenuptial agreements is we sort of flip the script on the statute. One of the other things we've talked about in my videos is equitable distribution. The basic premise is property acquired during marriage is marital property. But you can change that in a prenuptial agreement. You can make all property acquired during marriage separate property unless the parties agree to make it marital. For example, during marriage, any money earned during marriage is marital. You can change that in a prenup to say that any money earned during marriage is a separate property of that party who earned it. Another thing that we deal with in prenups is post-divorce maintenance. We can put in an agreement that there is a waiver of post-divorce maintenance. You have to be careful, though. The courts have said that if the agreement says there's a waiver of post-divorce maintenance, the court can still then order temporary maintenance while the divorce is pending. So in the prenup, you've got to put in specifically that there's a waiver of temporary maintenance while the divorce is pending and post-divorce maintenance. Waiving post-divorce maintenance in a prenuptial agreement is not a guarantee. The court will look to see whether that clause was reasonable at the time it was signed and reasonable at the time it was enforced. So let's say that you have a couple that they're both working, but then 20 years later, You have one spouse who stayed home for the whole 20 years raising the children, and the other spouse is making $1 million. It may no longer be reasonable to deny maintenance to the non-working spouse. So that's something else the court looks at. And this all goes into drafting a well-drafted prenuptial agreement and making sure the parties understand the extent of which a prenup may or may not be enforced by the court. This is the kind of stuff that you're not going to get off an internet prenuptial agreement. So I would recommend, if you have property that you're trying to protect, you contact an attorney to get a properly and well-drafted prenuptial agreement. And please, don't wait the week before the wedding. Give us at least a month. And if you have any questions, as always, you can call me at 516-352-2999 for a free 15-minute consultation. Remember, at Port and Sava, we help you get on with the rest of your life.